Okay, so what are the characteristics that define a globalized world? What are the characteristics of globalization? So first we have an increasingly dynamic mobile world. So this means that dynamism means changing, right? So the world is constantly changing and becoming more diverse and changing rapidly, especially with communication technologies, but also in terms of nation states changing, wars, global warming. The world is not in a static state, right? It's dynamic. And at the same time, the world itself has become more mobile in the sense that we have people migrating for different reasons, right? For if you consider some forced migrants, right? So people being pushed and pulled for various reasons. So, so people leaving their countries to escape war, famine, environmental catastrophe, all those things mean people are on the move, right? And then communication technologies also make it a more mobile world, right? That you can sort of take your culture with you and be connected to your culture at the same time. Intensification of interaction. Yes, so more and more this kind of like cultural interaction is becoming more intense. People meeting each other and cultures mixing that in an intense way that otherwise hasn't happened in the history of the world. A rapidly growing global interdependence. Yes. So the ways that nation states are interdependent on each other for goods and resources, for the way our economies are variously interdependent for goods, labor, manufacturing, distribution, and even take something like COVID-19, right? COVID-19 really shows how interdependent we all are, right? You can't really isolate it and say, oh, it was China's problem or oh, it's Italy's problem, right? It's all of our problem because of global interdependence. Also, globalization really magnifies inequities, so the differences between the haves and the have-nots, between powerful countries and less powerful countries, between countries that are, quote, developed in the first world and, quote unquote, developing countries and in the second and the quote unquote third world, right? And it really magnifies those inequities, right? There is a quote that how we all experience globalization is very different from where we are in the world, right? And the privilege of how we were born or not born, right? With the positionality that we were born into, right? And so globalization really heightens those inequities, or at least it really magnifies them, makes them more visible. An historical legacy of colonization, Western domination, and U.S. hegemony. Yes, so we have to take into account that history of and legacy of colonization. And again, there are some people who just think that really globalization is just the contemporary form of continued colonization of quote unquote first world countries dominating the developing countries, right? Through their use of trade restrictions and the exploitation of cheap, of people as cheap labor, right? And then also considering Western hegemony, Western military hegemony, right? The way that the U.S. like has exploited other countries in terms of its military and gone into other countries. Even like take something like the Panama Canal, right? The U.S. lays claim to the Panama Canal, even though it goes right through Panama, right? And also U.S. American cultural hegemony, right? So like American exports like Starbucks, McDonald's, Disney, right? These kind of like they're economic, but they also have a kind of like cultural influence that seems to kind of like dominate the world. What evidence do you see of this in your everyday lives? And you can really just think about news, current events, And you can see all of these various kinds of characteristics at play in our daily lives, right? Even take a product, right, where it was made, where it's distributed, and what and who consumes it, right? So like if you turn over the back of the orange juice carton, right, often it says made from oranges in Mexico, Brazil, and or Florida, right? So it's taking these oranges from all over from these three places in the world, and then it's distributed in them in out of Florida or whatever, right? And so that's an example of the way our world is more and more interdependent. And I'm sure you can think of some other examples of that kind of interdependence as well.